Welcome to the Hearts Entwined podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lynn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lynn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the Hearts Entwined podcast. This is your host, Lynn Smith, the Queen of Hearts. And today, listeners, I've got an actual old friend of mine, actually, and I've known her for, it must be a good decade or so now, mustn't it, Annette?
Exactly. Yeah, probably 10 or 15 even, I think, Lynn.
Yeah. So Annette is an old friend of mine. Her name's Annette Greenwood. She's a coach and author, and she's got such valuable, wise insights that she can share around relationships because she has been somebody that has actually been through the mill. So could you, first off, Annette, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your own history regarding your relationships past?
So I got married at the tender age, of 17. The very first time round. I've been with my current partner, first of all, for 38 years. We met 38 years ago last week. And so it seems a lifetime away, Lynn, from what happened in my first marriage. At 17, you think it's a fashionable thing, don't you? You think it's the best thing since sliced bread. And I was no different to probably any other young woman of that age. And I met and married somebody who I thought was going to look after me. I guess I was looking for a bit of a protector at that age. And he didn't protect me, he protected himself. And it wasn't until I married him till he started to hit me. So during the courtship, as it was called back in the day, there were no signs that he was going to be violent, sadly.
And how long were you courting for before you actually got married?
Well, probably in the terms of, I would say, a year. And that's too short, really, I guess, on reflection. But 12 months, but I would have expected him to have displayed something within that 12-month period, but he didn't. He kept it really well hidden. And it was a real shock the first time he ever hit me.
And how soon into the marriage did that sort of manifest or present itself?
It was a matter of weeks, to be fair. It was after an alcohol as well. He liked to bevy, and he came in one night and there was something not quite right with the meal I'd prepared, and he threw the plate with the food on it from one end of the room to the next. And I was quite exasperated, to be honest, that I'd seen this. I'd never seen anything like it. I'd not been brought up. My mum and dad argued, but there was never any violence or anything. And I said something to him about it. And the next thing I was, kind of reeling across the room. And that was my first experience of it. And do you remember that film, Lynn, Educating Rita?
Yes, yeah.
If you've ever seen it, or any of your listeners might have seen it, where she wants to better herself in life, doesn't she? And that was me. Even at that young age, I wanted to better myself. And in the film, he wants a baby, does the husband, and my husband wanted a baby. So I did exactly what she did. I had to hide my birth bills under the stair carpet so he didn't know they were there, because his family was saying there was something wrong with me because we'd been married 6 months and I hadn't already had a baby. I hadn't already conceived. And I was thinking, this is the last thing I want. I don't want a baby at 17. And I could just see it gradually, my whole life as it had been kind of slipping away from me. And each time there was something wrong in the relationship or a problem, he just resorted to violence every time.
And was it always on the back of drink, or was that sort of the I suppose prerequisite, or did it happen sometimes when it was sober?
When he was sober as well. I mean, it was always worse if he'd been drinking, and I can tell you the catalyst of my leaving him in a short while, but certainly it didn't take much. I found he had quite a short fuse, and I also found out that his mother had been living in a domestic violent relationship with his father, and she would be on the receiving end of violence quite a lot. So he'd been brought up with that. Now, I'm not kind of condoning what he did, but being brought up with that, he thought it was normal. But it was down to me to actually show him that it wasn't normal and it wasn't an acceptable way to be in a relationship. And this went on for between probably 3 to 5 years. And then there was 2 occasions that really sort of stick out for me. One was my uncle, who lived in Canada at the time, had bought me a beautiful sort of dinner set as a wedding present, and I had it on like a shelf in the kitchen. And he came in one night, and because things weren't the way he wanted, he just got a hammer and he started to hit this shelf, this wooden pine shelf, and he hit it. And every time he hit it, one of those beautiful dishes fell off and smashed. And each time it happened, each time one of these dishes fell off, I was getting more and more upset. And I remember picking a pan up to defend myself and whacking him round the head with this pan. It was like something out of a Carry On film, really. But I knew if I didn't defend myself, I was going to be right on the bottom end of this. And I've got a proper walloping. And I used to go to the doctors and tell the doctors that I'd got a headache and things like that. But I think the doctor knew that there was something not right. But back then, Lynn, there was no support for women in relationships like this. Nothing.
No, I can well imagine. So, were there any sort of physical injuries that you got that were visible to your friends and family?
Yeah, I get bruising on my arms, really. And when I used to go to the doctors and he'd say, "Oh, let me look at those bruises. What have you done?" And I said, I was up a ladder decorating and I fell, things like that. And I never really told my parents about it because I didn't want them to know what was going on. But I told them that I wasn't happy. And I used to leave him quite frequently when he'd had an outburst. And I'd leave him, then I'd go back to my parents for a while, and then he would say, "Oh, look, I'm going to change. I'm not going to do it again." And then you believe them, and then you go back again, and then within a few short weeks, it's just a little bit longer than it was the last time. So rather than it be 3 weeks back into the relationship, he hit me, the next time it'd be 5 or 6 weeks. So it always kind of delayed it for that little bit longer. And yeah, I had bruises on the back of on my arms. I had some bruising on my face, and then on the back of my head, he hit me in there, and I ended up with this great big lump on the back of my head. But I guess, knowing now in hindsight, it must have affected my mental health as well. And my self-esteem was completely rock bottom. There's just no two ways about that. I just thought that's what, maybe I deserve this in some way, which is what a lot of women in that situation feel, when actually nothing could have been further from the truth.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate state of affairs as well, because sometimes women that are in that situation, I think, tend to feel they can't confide in anybody because of their own sense of guilt and shame around it, when it's not their guilt and shame to own, is it? It's the perpetrators.
Absolutely. And you always think that when they tell you they're going to make some changes, you always think, well, maybe this time they will, maybe this time they will. And then he, on this particular occasion, he'd been out with his friends into a nightclub in town in York at the time, which is where we were living. He came home probably about 2 or 3 in the morning, and he got into bed, and he was obviously been drinking and stuff. And then he said, "Oh, I've had a great night at the nightclub. All these women have been dancing round me. Oh, and I've done this and I've done that." And something within me just snapped at that time. And I just sat up in bed and screamed something at him. And I'm bearing in mind, I'm still, I'm only still young at this point. And he got up from the bed where he was laid, and he sat on top of me so that I couldn't move. And he sort of put his knees on both my arms, really, so I wasn't able to do anything. And he just used me as a punch bag, basically. He just kept hitting me from, my head from one side of the pillow was bouncing from one side to the other. And he just kept doing that and just kept hitting me and hitting me. God knows how I didn't become unconscious, and I somehow managed to break free and wriggle off him. And there was a clock at the side of the bed, you know, the old-fashioned alarm clock with the great big bells on it. And I managed to pick that up and whack him on the shoulder to sort of distract him. And I grabbed my dressing gown or something off the back of the door, and I ran down the stairs and I ran out into the street in my bare feet. And I just ran round to my parents' house. They only lived sort of 5 or 10 minutes away. And I banged on the door there, and my mother opened the door, and she went, "My God, what the hell's going on?" And I just ran into the house, and I was just shaking, Lynn. I was obviously in shock, but I was just shaking, and I was sat on the sofa shaking, and she woke my dad up, and they took me to the local hospital. And that really was the start of the recovery, if you like, for me as a woman in domestic violence. How once I'd got to the hospital and they wanted to know what had gone on, and I said the usual kind of stuff to start with about, I could hear my mother. She was so upset in the reception area. And I was laid on this, on the trolley kind of thing, waiting for the doctor to come and see me. They wanted to x-ray me to make sure there was no broken bones or anything. And this young male nurse walked up to me and whispered in my ear, and he said, "Leave him, he's not worth it." And he knew, Lynn, he knew there was something going on. He knew that I was in the wrong relationship, and there was something within him, what he'd said, whether it was about timing or synchronicities or whatever you want to call it, but that sort of stayed with me. And I went back home the following day after being overnight in hospital, and I went and I just packed a backpack and I walked out, and I never went back.
What happened within the situation regarding him? Did you report any assault? I mean, was he arrested for anything, or, you know, was it just literally a parting of ways?
It was, the police had been called a couple of times because the next door neighbour had heard me screaming, and, you know, they'd banged on the door and stuff like that. And he'd answered the door, and they'd said, you know, we've got reports of a disturbance. And he'd said, "Well, no, she's here, she's fine." And of course, I didn't say anything. I was probably too frightened to. And this happened a couple of times. But then after I'd left him, and my resolve was very strong not to go back, I think that was probably the first time I'd taken a good hard look at myself and thought, God, what am I doing? Where am I going? I'm an absolute mess. I'm 22 years old, and or 21, and I'm in a relationship that where I'm just being treated like a punch bag. So I vowed I wasn't going to go back this time, and no matter what he did, no matter how many cards or flowers or anything he sent, I didn't go back. Now, at that time, I didn't really know much about karma and things like that, Lynn, but about 2 or 3 months after, I got a phone call from the local hospital, and they said, "Oh, is this Annette?" Whatever my surname was at the time. I won't mention it on air in case anybody knows him. And I said, "Yes, it is." "Well, your husband's in the psychiatric ward in the local hospital." I said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. What's the problem?" "Well, we understand that you've left him and you won't go back." And I said, "That's correct." And they said, "Well, we'd like you to reconsider because he's heavily sedated and he's talking about committing suicide." And I said, "Well, I'm really sorry, but that's not my problem. You have no idea what I've been through over the last 5 years, and for you to be ringing me and actually believing what he's saying without hearing my side of it." And she said, "Oh, well, no, we'd like you to reconsider. Will you at least come and visit?" So put the phone down, and my brother, who was alive at the time, I mentioned it to him, and he went to the hospital on my behalf, and he went to see my ex-husband. And he told my ex-husband that in no uncertain terms was I ever going to be going back to him, and that if he wanted to try and blackmail me and carry out this threat of committing suicide, he best get on with it because I wasn't going anywhere back. He then went to the nurses and said to the nurses, "You know, you have no right to ring my sister and tell her that she must go back into a relationship that was unsafe, and that nearly killed her. And I then set about divorce proceedings, and divorced him. The divorce took about a year, I think, or something like that, about a year and a half. But even in that year, he still tried to get me back. He still tried to get me back to go back into the relationship. But by then, I'd grown so far apart and was starting to align with my own true self that there was never going to be any going back as far as I was concerned, never. And he ended up marrying the girl that I used to sit next to at school, which was really spooky, and setting his own business up and having a family and children and everything with her. And I've never seen him from that day to this, ever, in all these years.
Just makes you wonder, though, whether she went through the same as you, or whether he was able to do some healing of his own and resolve some of that, from his own childhood, obviously, what he witnessed, behaviours.
Yeah, and I did hear my dad actually bumped into him probably about 10 years ago. And my dad said he was still talking about you, even though, he was married with grown-up children, in a way that my dad said, I just couldn't believe he was still talking about, as though you were still with him. He said, and I said to him, you caused my daughter untold pain, and if I'd have known what was going on, I'd have had my daughter out of there sooner. And he said, yes, I did make mistakes. He said, but I've turned my life round. He ended up being a football coach, I believe, for young people who've been going through drug and alcohol problems themselves. Now, if he's grown up and he's turned his life round as a result, well, I'm really happy for him and I wish him well. I've gone past the point of where I hated him for what he'd done to me, and I'd be lying if I sat here and said it was all sweetness and light after I left him, because I had to go through my own healing. It wasn't until some years later that I was actually able to forgive him, and I mean forgive him properly, where I felt no ill will or any malice towards him, Lynn.
The thing is that you can forgive the person. You don't have to forgive the behaviours, but you can forgive the person, can't you? Because they know no better. Let's be honest. If that's what he witnessed as being the norm in his own environment as a child growing up, that's what he learned, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I see it time and time again now, through sort of all those years have gone by and people I've worked in my own coaching work, and I see it, and I still see it, where that those learnt behaviours have sadly ruined and caused so much hurt and pain, where men or women have seen things going on in the parents' relationships and thought it was okay to be like that. And it takes somebody like myself, or maybe you, or somebody else who has a certain something and says, no, this isn't right. This is not the way you behave. This is not acceptable. And while ever I'm prepared to allow it to go on, it will go on. And if I'd have stayed in that relationship, I have no doubt I probably wouldn't still be here now, Lynn. No doubt at all.
It's about, isn't it, like you say, you're having those boundaries and coming to a point where, this isn't acceptable. And by me forgiving or allowing that behaviour to continue, even though he's obviously broke the promise of not doing it again, in some ways you actually condone that behaviour, don't you, in the relationship if you stay in it?
You do, and you don't realise that at the time, do you? You don't realise that you are condoning it, because you're so wrapped up in this thing about believing, because you so want to believe that they are going to change this time and they really mean it. And he's brought me these flowers, and he said he's sorry and he won't do it again, and it's because he's had a bad day at work. And you look for all those excuses and you hang on to those and believe those and just cloud your own judgment, because actually you are making it worse, and you are the one that needs to take responsibility for your own life. Pull on your big girl pants and start to realise that nobody else is going to do it, and he isn't going to change. The person that really needs to change is you or me in that case.
Yeah, most certainly. I agree with that. And unfortunately, in those days, I can remember, because I joined the police force in the late 70s, early 80s. I was serving. And in those days, even the police didn't take domestic violence seriously, unless the woman was prepared to make a complaint. And even if she was brave enough to make a complaint, she usually retracted it, and that was the end of the matter. It wasn't sort of like it is today, where they take it a bit more seriously, and the woman doesn't actually need to make a complaint. The police will, actually prosecute just on the injuries they see in terms of the assault, and she doesn't even need to make a statement today. But in those days, that wasn't the case, was it?
No, and I think the only thing around back in the day was Women's Aid or something like that. There wasn't, the organisations and groups that are around now. And certainly you're right, the police then, it was very much a closed door thing, wasn't it? If you weren't prepared to say something, they just used to wash their hands and say, well, it's domestic, it's a domestic, just kind of leave them to get on with it. But there's so much more support now within the police, which is so much better. And women are able to step up, aren't they, and get out of these relationships with the right support, and sometimes in really dire situations and relationships that are so harmful and destructive, and toxic and dangerous that they're fearful to leave. But now they've got plans in place to help women escape that, and quite right as well, Lynn. It almost sounds like we're talking about something from 100 million years ago, because it's not that far long ago, is it, that this was still going on and the police weren't involved and weren't able, they didn't have the powers, or it wasn't on their agenda to help women in domestic violent relationships, and men now, as we know, it happens in both relationships.
Definitely. And like you say, there wasn't, I suppose, the cooperation between the multi-agencies like there is today either.
Oh, no. I mean, I've worked on cases with women who've been in these kind of relationships, and there's about 5 or 6 different agencies involved, all working together towards the same common goal, to get that woman out of a relationship and into safety. I worked on one a few years ago when I was doing some coaching work in the probation service at the time and the prison service. And this woman had been in this relationship for years and years, and I could just see it in her. I could see myself in her. And I always used to find that, Lynn, I would see, when I was working with women, I'd see me in them. There was something about them that resonated, somewhere I'd been in my life. And this woman had been in this relationship, and forever, he was always going to say he was going to change, and he was just hitting her, and then he'd be doing drugs, and he'd be breaking and entering, and she'd be back in this vicious circle again. She'd work with me for a few months and she'd get really back on track, and then next time I'd see her, she'd have a black eye, and it was just all the time going backwards and forwards. And then the really sort of catalyst for her was when she got pregnant to him, and they had this baby. And the baby had only been born a short time, sadly, and social services were called in because the neighbours had heard glass, and they'd been fighting, and the baby was on the floor, and this baby was only a few weeks old. So the baby had to be taken into care. And that was the thing that actually shook her head and said, I can't do this anymore. And she wanted to get out of it. And he said, you're not leaving me, and all those old threats. So all the agencies, myself included at the time, pulled together to get her out of this relationship. And she did. She got out of it. She moved area and she started her life over again. And she actually met with her family, who she'd not seen for years and years. But sadly, that baby was kept in care and adopted, because she couldn't be trusted to have the baby back. And it was so sad to see it, so sad. But in a way, having that baby changed her life round, and thankfully the baby's it's in a lovely home now, and probably about 5 years old. But it was just sad to see it, Lynn, and so sad that I could see it in her, what had been happening to me, and I was powerless to do anything because I knew it had to come from her. But the agency, the multi-agency approach, is so good and so empowering if you get the right people to help.
Definitely. So what do you think was it for you, in terms of I suppose the one thing that sort of, I suppose, allowed you to sort of stay in that toxic environment? What was it that sort of kept you there initially? And then what was it that was a mindset shift that created the leverage to say, no, this is it, I've had enough?
Because I thought, and this is the difference, I thought I loved him. And I thought that it was one of those things, when you're married, marriage is for life and all that. That was a really old-fashioned probably belief that I'd been stuck with from my own parents and other people's parents that had gone to school with that, marriage is for life.
And you're in it together. You've made your bed and all that.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. I was like, oh God, I've got to try and make this work. And actually, I was just a kid, wasn't I, at 17? I was a kid who knew no better, and thought it was probably a good thing, and it was a grown-up thing to do, was to get married. What the hell was I doing? I needed to give my brains a shake, really, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. And the more I was getting hit, and the more that I was losing more of my self-respect and more of me, if you like, that was the thing, that the mindset change was actually being in that hospital, seeing myself in that position, the nurse saying to me, leave him, he's not, you're worth better. And it was that you're worth better must have just stuck somewhere with me. And the mindset shift was, I am worth better than this, because 5 years of this, can I do another 5? No, I'm going to be 25, 26. It was still relatively young. And even then I was thinking, well, there's got to be somebody else out there who will love me for who I am. But I'd made the mistake, as I was saying to you earlier, in that many women make, is I was looking for somebody else to love me. I was looking for that confirmation from somebody else that they could love me for who I was. But actually, I hadn't learned to love myself enough. And I was never going to meet my prince after kissing all these frogs until I'd learned to love myself first and foremost, and align with who I was and attract the right person into my life.
Yeah, because I think quite often we think, that happiness lies externally, don't we? We put that pressure on somebody else, be it our partner, our family, our friends, to be, we sort of make them responsible for our own happiness, when really the focus needs to come from within, doesn't it? And first and foremost, we need to be happy and create that happiness within ourselves.
Yeah, and you don't always know how to do that, do you, Lynn? It's that something needs to change, but you feel powerless to change it because you don't know how it has to change. And I remember, going from one relationship to the next. I don't mean it was like I had a different boyfriend or a different partner every week, but each relationship I had, there was something within that relationship about my ex-partner. So it was whether they were lying to me, whether they were sleeping with somebody else at the same time and never told me, or whether they were wanting me to lend them money, all things that had been in that previous relationship, but they were only displaying one particular behaviour of the past relationship. And I just kept thinking, oh God, next time when I meet somebody, they're going to be different. There'll be that change because they'll be different, not realising all the time that it was me who had to do the changing and not them. So it was always about me and what I had to do to change myself, to be happy in my own skin, to accept the woman that I was, and that I wanted to find my own voice and share it in the world. And I had to do that first before I would meet somebody who was actually, that I believed to be worthy of me now, not the other way around.
Exactly. It's looking at yourself and thinking, you know what, I'm fabulous. I'm super happy being single. I haven't got a problem, with that idea of knowing that I'm worthy and deserving of a phenomenal relationship. And like you say, putting yourself in the position of confidence of knowing that they need to show that they're worthy of me, not the other way around.
100%. And that I totally align with what you're saying, Lynn, there, that I don't need to be in a relationship to make me whole, to make me complete. I don't need to have a man in my life. I don't need to, from a clinging perspective or a needy sort of woman perspective, I don't need to have that to make me the person that I am. Now, I may want to be in a relationship, but that relationship has to meet me on my terms now, and we have to be aligned in an equal relationship, and not where one's got more power than the other, or or one's calling all the shots. It has to be a relationship that's equal for it to work for me now, and I'm not prepared to compromise on that.
It's about setting your own standards and boundaries, isn't it? So what before we wrap up the episode, Annette, what advice would you give to a woman that's probably listening to this podcast that knows that they are in a toxic or domestic violence situation? What would be your words of wisdom?
I would say, first of all, recognise that you are in a toxic relationship. It's okay. You haven't done anything wrong. It's not your fault. That's the first thing. Self-blame is never going to get you anywhere. And the second thing is I would reach out to the many organisations that there are out there now that can help you. And even if you've got a trusted family member or a friend, or if you haven't, you can speak, even if you speak to somebody at the Samaritans or a helpline or something, or there's people like yourself and me, Lynn, who help women move on from toxic relationships. But if you're not in a place where you're ready for that, don't be afraid to use what's available. Go online. There are organisations out there that will help you. But first and foremost, trust me, you are not a bad person and you don't deserve this. You deserve so much better, and a life that's full of love, and a rich relationship just for the special you that you are.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing your personal story around that, and I'm sure it's going to be very powerful for the audience members to listen to, especially those that are probably in a position where they can resonate exactly with where you were in the past domestic violence situation.
It's my huge pleasure, Lynn. Always happy.
And on that note, what would be your best contact, Annette, for any of our audience members that would like to get in touch with you?
I guess for people who want to contact me personally, because it might not be something they want to share on a social media, I can give you my email address, which is annette@annettegreenwood.com.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Annette, and for being courageous enough and vulnerable enough to share your past experience for the benefit of the audience. I'm sure it's going to be much appreciated and very helpful to those that are needing to hear your words.
It's my pleasure, Lynn. And as always, I love sort of spending time with you. We've got so much to talk about and so much in common. And I hope this will really benefit some of your listeners in some way.
Okay, so in order to wrap up then, listeners, I'll just end with what I usually say, and that is, true love starts with opening our hearts. And until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lynn via the Facebook group Two Hearts Entwined, or search Lynn Smith, inspirational speaker, at LinkedIn, or email lynn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.